They say a life doesn't collapse. It unfolds slowly, like a seam unraveling in the dark. But that isn't how mine ended and began. Mine started with a knock at 11:17 p.m., a sound so soft it almost felt like a secret confessing itself at my door. I was in the kitchen rinsing a wineglass I hadn't fully committed to, listening to the hum of a house that had known me for 37 years, a house that knew where my steps faltered and where my voice went quiet. The knock came again. 3 light taps, not a demand, an invitation. I dried my hands on a towel and felt something I couldn't name rise through me like heat through floorboards. My name is Marina. I am a wife, a mother, a keeper of lists. Groceries, repairmen, dosage instructions for my husband's blood pressure, ideas for my daughter's bridal shower, passwords, past lives, and things to never say aloud. My husband, Daniel, slept upstairs with the television whispering itself to sleep, the blue light pooling in the hallway like water he might drown in if he weren't careful. We had stopped asking each other real questions some years ago. Not because we didn't love each other, but because it seemed unwise to prod at the quiet we had managed to keep. Love, I used to think, was a shelter. Lately it felt like a room I was careful not to redecorate for fear the ceiling would fall. When I opened the door, rain blew across the threshold and found me. There he was, not a stranger but not quite a friend, either. Jonah, the neighbor from the house with the lemon tree and the porch swing that no one ever used. He was younger than me by 12 years. He wore the kind of sorrow that makes men beautiful in the wrong light. His sister had died the week before after a relapse no one saw coming, and I had brought over a pie he didn't touch, and a casserole he pretended he would. "I'm sorry," he said, as if the rain were his fault. "I heard a crash, everything okay?" There hadn't been a crash. Unless a dish settling in a cabinet counts as a catastrophe, unless a heart hitting the inside of a ribcage is a noise loud enough to alarm the lonely. But I told him yes, I was fine, and then I heard my own voice say, "Do you want to come in?" The question felt like stepping onto a frozen pond and waiting to learn if this winter was generous or cruel. He stepped inside, shaking water from his hair, not touching me but changing the shape of the air between us. We sat at the kitchen table, and he looked around the room as if it were a museum of a life he wanted to remember how to live. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. "Since the summer my daughter learned to ride a bike," I said. "She was 7, she's 30 now." It felt like telling someone a story with a blade hidden in it. He nodded, eyes drifting to the family photos on the sideboard, the ones I curated like a garden so no one would see the bare patches. "I always liked the light in this kitchen," he said. "It feels seen." The word shivered through me. Seen, when he left, he didn't touch me. He said, "Good night, Marina." The clock said 12:03. I stood in the doorway as the rain softened, and I realized with a clarity that frightened me that a life does collapse, sometimes with a shy knock and a glass that never gets rinsed all the way to clean. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it, and for the first time in years I let myself feel the price of quiet. Upstairs, Daniel stirred. "Everything okay?" he called, not fully awake. "Yes," I said, and it was the last uncomplicated truth I told for a very long time. The first rule of the heart is that it lies. The second is that it does so to survive. I began to move through my days like a woman trying not to spill a secret she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. The laundry, the appointments, the measured conversations, everything in its correct place, everything tidy as a cover story. If Daniel noticed I was waking before dawn and standing at the window, he didn't say. If he saw the lemon-yellow bloom of a bruise on my wrist from where a stack of plates had slipped, he only said, "Careful," and I wanted to tell him that was all I had ever been. I saw Jonah again on a Tuesday morning when the neighborhood was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. He was kneeling in the damp grass with pruning shears, cutting away dead branches from a rose bush that had survived the winter without bloom. "You should cut back more," I said, surprising both of us. "It looks harsh, but sometimes the flowers need the wound to know where to grow." He glanced up and smiled in that soft, tired way. "I don't know what to do with things that keep living when they've forgotten how," he said. "You cut," I said, "and you wait." We started leaving each other small, ordinary offerings the way people in old villages used to leave bread and salt at doorways. He returned my casserole dish with a lemon inside. I left a book on grief on his porch with a note tucked into the middle. "Try chapter 8 when you can breathe." He texted me a photo of the lemon tree at dusk, light folding itself around leaves like prayer. And I sent back a recipe for lemon bars I hadn't made since my daughter was 10, and nothing tasted like regret. One evening, Daniel and I attended a retirement party for a colleague of his at a hotel ballroom that was too cold and too bright. He introduced me as my better half, a phrase that made me ache as if language could bruise. People asked rote questions. Where does your daughter live now? How's the garden this year? Are you still volunteering at the clinic? I smiled until my face felt borrowed. On the drive home, he said, we should go to the coast this fall. We never take time anymore. I kept my eyes on the white lines sliding by. We should, I said. We didn't. The first time Jonah and I touched, it wasn't a kiss. It was a hand on a wrist in a grocery store aisle, the fluorescent lights making everything too honest, when my bag split and lemons rolled across the floor like little suns escaping their orbits. He appeared from behind a pyramid of apples and knelt to catch one before it spun under a shelf. Careful, he said, passing it to me, his fingers brushing my skin as if testing the weather there. The word again. Careful. I paid for the fruit and couldn't remember what else I had come for. At night, I started reading old journals I had written in my 20s, when I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted, and none of it included the woman who stood at a kitchen sink, trying not to tremble when her phone lit up with a message that read, "The roses are trying again." I told myself this was grief-aware neighborliness, that any intrigue was a kindness for a man learning how to breathe without someone he loved. I lied beautifully. I lied the way women are taught to. With care, with reason, with recipes and reminders and soft exits that aren't exits at all. What I pretended not to hear was the tempo of my own pulse when his car pulled into his driveway at night, or the way the house felt too loud when Daniel snored, or the way my name sounded when nobody said it with shape and weather in their mouth. What a person can ignore becomes their home. What they cannot becomes the door they eventually open. We rented the little blue house at the edge of the marsh because no one we knew went that far to hide, and because the porch felt like a held breath. It wasn't ours, but once we stepped inside, the afternoon belonged to us. A cracked pitcher with freckles of rust, a sofa that sighed when it accepted our weight, a window that collected light like secrets. We called it the afternoon house because we never stayed past dusk. We never dared to see what our faces looked like under lamps meant for lovers who had permission to be there. It happened slowly then suddenly, like all irreversible things. A conversation that clung to me for days, a laugh I tasted hours after it ended, a shoulder leaned into for a second longer than decency allows. The first time we kissed, it was raining the way the sky rains when it's tired of holding back, big, fat drops that make even the earth flinch. He closed the door of the afternoon house and turned to me and said, "Tell me when to stop." I thought of all the times I hadn't said stop to smaller losses, time, attention, touch, because I wanted to be easy, good, survivable. "Don't," I said. "Not yet." And then his mouth found mine, and every carefully folded version of myself came undone like laundry tipped from a basket. Desire at my age felt like a miracle that had the courtesy to knock first. It was not the hunger of youth, frantic and shining. It was something slower, a knowing that lived in the bones and had patience for nothing but the truth. In the afternoon house, we were not young, but we were new, and sometimes that is more dangerous. He told me about his sister, the way loss calcified and then cracked. I told him about the long, quiet places in my marriage where nothing was wrong and everything hurt anyway. We did not promise each other anything we could not give. We spoke in offerings, a nap together on a Tuesday, a poem left under a sugar bowl, a playlist titled Late Light, a lemon bar wrapped in wax paper like a love note that melts on the tongue. We learned each other's storms, how he went silent when afraid, how I laughed when I wanted to cry. We learned to ask, "How's your weather?" when "How are you?" felt like a question that could break us. The rules were simple because simple felt holy. Never text after 9 p.m., never call each other by pet names, never ever say forever. The rules held until they didn't. They never do. One evening, when the marsh smelled like summer's last green breath, he said, "I keep thinking about your kitchen light." "What about it?" I asked, tracing the faint scar on his wrist where a childhood dog had loved him too rough. "It makes everything worth keeping look like it was always meant to be kept," he said. I started to cry then, quietly, because it felt like someone had confessed to me that I was a room they wanted to return to. The day after, Daniel found the receipt from the afternoon house tucked into a coat I should have left at the back of the closet. "What's this?" he asked, holding it as if the paper might describe him if he stared long enough. My mouth filled with cotton and lies. "A venue for the clinic volunteer party," I said. The lie was neat, clean, plausible. He nodded and set it down as if truth and fiction weighed the same. That night he reached for me and I reached back, and it felt like trying to start a car that had faithfully carried us across decades and finally refused to recognize the key. I cried afterward in the bathroom with the shower running. Not because I was guilty, though I was, but because there was still a version of me that wanted to deserve my life. The afternoon house held our heat for hours after we left, and when I locked the door, I pressed my palm to the wood as if a pulse might answer. On the drive home, I passed the lemon tree and saw it glint with fruit like lit coins, a fortune I had no right to spend. Secrets are not kept, they keep and they demand interest. As autumn sketched itself across the trees, I found myself standing in grocery store aisles, unable to remember my own handwriting, as if changing the list might change the life. Daniel grew solicitous. More dinners out, a weekend drive to a lake where the wind understood things I couldn't say, a new sweater the color of new leaves, he said, would bring out my eyes. "You've been far away," he said finally one night, not angry, just tired. "Come back." The kindness destroyed me more than suspicion ever could have. My daughter, Claire, called to announce a December wedding date suddenly moved to February. "Before spring gets ideas," she joked, and I made the appropriate noises of joy while my chest felt like a room full of birds. She asked if I'd help choose flowers, and when she said she wanted lemon leaves tucked into the bouquet to honor Jonah's sister. Claire had become friendly with him after the memorial. I tasted metal. "That's beautiful," I said, and it was. Devotion and ruin often share a vase. Thanksgiving carved the fault lines wider. We hosted, as always, and the house filled with garlic and laughter and the particular fatigue of a family that knows each other's worst and shows up anyway. Jonah came late, carrying a pie in a box and a small bouquet of rosemary because "it's for remembrance," he said, meeting my eyes for a moment too long in a room too bright. I took the bouquet and felt the brush of his knuckles like a match head. We didn't speak alone, not once, but the air held our names like notes in the pocket of a coat you don't dare wear to the wrong place. After midnight, when the dishwasher hummed and the counters gleamed, Daniel kissed the top of my head and said, "We do good, you and me." It was the truest thing he'd said all season and somehow the cruelest. We did do good. We had built something worth bowing to. We had also built rooms where I hid from the version of myself that wanted more than goodness. December brought the quiet kind of snow, the kind that makes even bad decisions look gentle under it. The afternoon house shut down for the holidays, all rentals suspended, and I told myself it was a sign, a mercy, like the universe had decided to do the obedience I could not. But longing is a locksmith, it will find a door. We started meeting at the old greenhouse, behind the florist off Maple Street, on Thursdays at 4. When the owner closed early and left the heat lamps on for orchids that knew nothing of human trespass. Surrounded by petals and damp earth, we kissed like people trying to plant a season where it didn't belong. On the last Thursday before Christmas, Daniel called as I was leaving the greenhouse. "Come home," he said. "I made your mother's stew." His voice held an old tenderness that made the world tilt. I drove past the lemon tree, past our house, past myself, circling the block 3 times to remember which version of me knew how to open the front door without changing everything. When I finally stepped inside, the house smelled like memory, and Daniel held out a spoon like a peace offering. "You're cold," he said, touching my cheek. "I thought, it's a wonder you don't burn." That night, I dreamed of an orchard where every fruit had my name on it, and every hand that reached for it was mine. The new year arrived without a trumpet, only a thin blue sunrise that made the frost look like a secret the morning wanted to keep. Claire sent a text. "Mom, you're okay, right? You've been quiet." I typed, erased, typed again. "Busy, happy for you, show me the shoes." She sent a photo of white heels with lemon-colored ribbons. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palm to my chest, as if my heart were a doorbell I could make stop. The unraveling came on a Wednesday in March, as ordinary as laundry. Daniel had borrowed my car for an oil change and found, buried in the glove compartment under insurance forms and old tissues, a folded piece of paper with an address and a date, and a word that meant nothing to anyone but everything to us. Greenhouse, he didn't rage. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the witness to our entire marriage, and said, "How long?" Not who, not why, just the length of the wound. "Months," I said, and the room echoed like an empty church. He closed his eyes as if bracing for a wave. "Is it love?" he asked. I could have said no and saved us both the cost of certain kinds of light. I didn't. It's something that made me remember I'm alive, I said. He laughed then, one sharp, ugly sound that didn't belong to the man I'd known since I was 22. I thought that's what we were, he said. Alive together. The quiet afterward was a winter that wouldn't end. We tried the things people try when they want to put a house back together with string and apologies. Therapy. Walks at sunset where we pretended the dying light was romantic and not metaphor. We even drove to the coast and stood in wind that erased our sentences. What do you want? He asked. To stop wanting, I said. It was both true and a lie. I ended it with Jonah before Claire's wedding, as if ending something could absolve it. We met one last time at the greenhouse. The orchids bowed their pale, impossible faces to us as if this were theater, and we the only ones who didn't know our lines. I can't keep doing this to him, I said. Or to me, he nodded, eyes bright the way eyes get when the body decides not to cry after all. I don't want to be your secret, he said. I wanted to be your life. The kindness of that destroyed me. You were my life, I said. For a while, in the afternoons, in the lemon light. We held each other and then we didn't. At the wedding, Claire walked down the aisle with lemon leaves tucked into her bouquet, and the air smelled green and clean, like forgiveness we hadn't earned. Daniel squeezed my hand and I squeezed back, and the vows sounded like a story I had once believed and might again if given time. After the dance, Jonah approached us, looking like a man who had learned how to stand inside his own hurt without asking it to move. He shook Daniel's hand. He nodded to me. That was all. It was enough to undo me and enough to hold me up. That night, Daniel and I slept in the same bed like two travelers sharing a fire. Grateful, wary, certain only of the warmth between us right now, and not at all of the road ahead. Spring came not as a promise, but as a negotiation. The lemon tree threw new flowers into the air like confetti. No one had the energy to sweep. I started volunteering more at the clinic again, taking calls from women who asked questions in whispers because the things they needed embarrassed them. I told them what I have learned. Shame is only useful if it keeps you from stepping into traffic. Beyond that, it is just a dress that never fit. Daniel and I began to talk like people who didn't assume they knew the endings of each other's sentences. Some nights we ate on the porch and didn't say a word and didn't mistake that for failure. He went to a men's group on Tuesdays and came home with the look of someone who had been told a hard truth gently. I missed you, he said one night, as if the verb had stretched over a continent and returned with stories. I missed me, I said. We both laughed and it sounded like something growing. I saw Jonah sometimes at the market or out walking at dusk, and we nodded like survivors at sea whose boats had drifted to different shores. Once he stopped beside me by the lemons and said, "How's your weather?" I smiled. "Variable," I said. "Intervals of sun." He grinned and moved on, and I felt, for the first time in a year, that I could love more than one version of my life without burning any of them to the ground. One evening I returned to the afternoon house alone. The porch needed paint. The pitcher still freckled with rust. The light at 4 o'clock still in absolution. I sat on the sofa and listened to the marsh say the names of all the things it has seen and kept and let go. I cried, then didn't. I forgave myself, then didn't. Healing is work, and sometimes the only tool is time. On the way home, I stopped by the lemon tree and picked a single fruit. At my kitchen counter, I zested it into sugar, and the room filled with the smell of something sharp and bright that didn't apologize for what it was. After dinner, I brought Daniel a small square of lemon bar dusted with sugar. He took a bite and closed his eyes and said, "This tastes like when we were 25 and poor and greedy for everything." I touched his wrist and felt his pulse, steady as a lighthouse. We sat there in the half-light with our mistakes cooling on the counter like something we could learn to live with. If there is a moral, I don't know it. Love is an orchard that belongs to no one and everyone. Desire does not ask permission. Loyalty is an animal that must be fed daily or it will forage elsewhere. What remains is this: light and what it shows when we are brave enough to look, choice and what it costs. And the quiet faith that tomorrow might bring a weather we can stand in together without pretending we don't feel the rain. We don't feel the rain.